Welcome back to Hopetales, where ordinary people turn into unexpected heroes at 35,000 feet. Night skies have always been a sanctuary for cargo pilots. Far away from crowded cabins, anxious passengers, and flashing cameras, there exists a quieter world, one where only engine hums. Starlight and soft cockpit glows accompany the journey. For pilot Zara Khan, this world felt like home. No noise, no pressure, no expectations, just routine. And routine meant safety. The aircraft assigned to her that night, a heavy C-17 Globemaster, carried medical cargo, relief kits, packed supplies, and sealed pallets. Nothing unpredictable. The route was one she had flown dozens of times, and the night seemed ideal. Clear air, smooth winds, low traffic. The kind of flight that never makes headlines. Inside the cockpit, Zara maintained her usual precision. Every control input remained steady, every system behaved as expected, and the engines performed flawlessly. Her co-pilot, Captain Rahan, recorded numbers and monitored gauges with calm confidence. There was no sign of trouble, no hint of danger, only the silent comfort of altitude and darkness. But the sky often hides what it's about to reveal. A faint shiver passed through the aircraft's structure, so delicate that most pilots would ignore it. Zara didn't. The slight tremor beneath her boots, the barely perceptible hum, the minor shift in the engine rhythm, all of it registered instantly in her mind. Years of flying cargo, years of listening to machines, had trained her senses to detect the smallest warnings long before any alarm appeared. System panels glowed steadily. No red lights, no alerts, yet something felt off, like a silent warning from the aircraft itself. Minutes later, the first anomaly surfaced. One of the engines began showing irregular RPM fluctuations, subtle but persistent. It wasn't enough to trigger alarms, but Zara's instincts sharpened. Cargo flights rely heavily on anticipating problems early, especially when traveling long distances across night, skies with limited diversion options. The aircraft continued forward, slicing through the darkness, unaware of the storm gathering within its own body. Then came the first failure. A sudden jolt threw the aircraft slightly off balance. One engine abruptly dropped to zero output, forcing the plane to compensate. The cockpit lit up with red indicators, each one flashing urgent warnings. The once steady hum of four engines became uneven, the vibration growing sharper. The C-17, though capable of flying with three engines, had instantly lost its comfortable safety margin. The atmosphere inside the cockpit thickened. Rehan immediately initiated emergency procedures while Zara stabilized the aircraft. Years of training aligned perfectly, silent coordination, precise movements, cold focus. Despite the tension, the aircraft began to level out again, regaining partial control. But the sky wasn't done. Before stabilization could fully settle, the second engine faltered. This time, the failure came brutally, a violent shudder, a surge of heat, and sudden silence from another side of the aircraft. Losing two engines on opposite sides created asymmetric thrust, dragging the aircraft into a hazardous descent. The nose dipped, altitude began dropping rapidly, and the C-17 trembled like a massive bird struck mid-flight. Cargo inside the hold shifted violently. Metal containers banged against each other. Straps tightened under crushing force, and loose equipment slid toward the back. The center of gravity shifted, making Zara's control inputs even more crucial. Cascade of alarms erupted across the cockpit panels. Systems flickered unpredictably. Warning icons overlapped one another, forming a wall of red. Electrical fluctuations spread through the avionics, dimming and brightening lights in uneven pulses. The aircraft, once a disciplined machine, behaved like a wounded giant struggling to stay airborne. Yet Zara remained composed. Cargo pilots learned to fly without relying too heavily on automated systems. They trained for worst-case scenarios often overlooked by passenger aviation. Her hands held the controls firmly, countering the pull, adjusting the pitch, balancing asymmetric thrust, doing everything human skill could do to override mechanical chaos. However, the aircraft's internal systems deteriorated faster than expected. Communication channels began to flicker. Primary radios failed first, cutting off standard contact. Secondary radios followed with sporadic static. Emergency frequencies attempted to connect, but the signals were unstable, as if interference disrupted them. Navigation screens froze mid-update. Critical sensors blinked on and off. Even the backup transponder, designed for the harshest failures, behaved erratically. The C-17 was slowly going silent. Losing engines was one kind of danger. Losing communication was another. But losing both at the same time in the middle of the night was something far beyond coincidence. The aircraft now descended through a layer of thin clouds, the moonlight fading as wisps of vapor streaked past the windshield. Zara monitored altitude obsessively. The rate of descent remained high but controllable, for now. Rehan worked tirelessly through emergency checklists, though many systems refused to respond. Despite all efforts, the deterioration continued. Flight management screens froze completely, leaving only partial data available. Hydraulic readings fluctuated. Electrical buses tripped alternately. It felt as if the aircraft suffered not from a single failure, but a chain of internal collapses spreading from system to system like an unseen wave. Yet neither of them understood the cause. No lightning strikes, no turbulence, no external threat visible. Just a quiet night, turning dangerously quiet. With the radios nearly dead, only intermittent static emerged from speakers, brief, fragments of sound with no clarity. Occasionally, a distant transmission attempted to break through, but it was impossible to identify whether it was civilian traffic, ground control, or something else entirely. Each burst of static offered hope and then dissolved into silence. Altitude continued decreasing. Fuel remained stable, but two dead engines forced the aircraft to work harder, consuming energy faster. Stability depended almost entirely on Zara's manual control, an exhausting task requiring absolute concentration. Still, she kept flying. Every second of control she maintained helped push the aircraft toward survival, even though the night grew darker, the instruments less reliable, and the uncertainty heavier. Far below, air bases and radar stations might or might not have detected the descending aircraft. No one in the cockpit could know. The C-17 remained isolated, a silent giant limping across a sky that offered no answers. But the sky was listening. Somewhere far off, where military radars sweep the horizon and fighter jets patrol invisible routes, the faint trace of a struggling C-17 began appearing on screens. The irregular altitude drop, the unstable transponder signal, the incomplete data signature, all of it caught the attention of people who were trained to notice what others overlook. The night wasn't silent anymore. Not entirely. Something, or someone, had begun to notice. The C-17 continued its slow, uneven descent, drifting through layers of cold night air. Nothing inside the aircraft felt stable anymore. Each vibration carried a different warning. Each flicker of the cockpit lights hinted at deeper failures. The once reliable giant now moved like a wounded creature, dragging itself forward through a sky that had turned unrecognizable. Inside the cockpit, Zara fought for every second of control. The yoke resisted in unpredictable ways, as if the hydraulics themselves were confused. Surfaces responded with slight delays, making each adjustment a delicate gamble. Behind her, the cargo hold rumbled, metal containers scraping and thudding as the aircraft's sudden changes in pitch shifted, the load again and again. Critical procedures flashed through her mind: engine out handling, power redistribution, electrical failure sequences, but she couldn't rely on any single checklist. Too many systems were collapsing simultaneously. Too many warnings appeared at once, overlapping until they were almost meaningless. The C-17, built to withstand harshest conditions, seemed to be losing its internal voice. Altitude dropped steadily. Fuel burn remained abnormal. Electrical load shifted in uncontrollable patterns. Every second of flight felt like borrowed time. Far below, unknown radar operators were tracking the aircraft's strange signature. Some systems saw it blinking on and off. Others saw only fragments of its transponder pulse. The erratic data stream suggested more than just engine trouble. It hinted at an aircraft caught in a spiraling chain of failures. Still, no direct link returned to the cockpit. Static filled the radio like a heavy wall, refusing to let anything clear through. Occasionally, a faint pulse of sound appeared, as if someone far away attempted contact, but nothing intelligible emerged. Outside the cockpit windows, the night remained deceptively calm. Moonlight cast a silver line across the aircraft's nose, clouds drifting silently below. The contrast between the serene sky and the chaos inside made everything feel even more surreal. Suddenly, the aircraft shuddered again. This time, the cause wasn't engine failure. It was aerodynamic instability. Two dead engines on one side created uneven thrust patterns each time the remaining engines changed output. The autopilot had already failed, leaving Zara with the impossible task of hand-flying a machine designed to rely heavily on automated corrections. Her grip remained iron-strong on the controls, muscles burning with the effort to keep wings level. Rehan continued working through every remaining system, attempting to reroute power, isolate circuits, and recover even the smallest functionality. Yet the cockpit screens progressively dimmed, some going completely dark. The few that stayed alive showed fragmented information, half-rendered maps, frozen numbers, incomplete engine data. It became a battle against both gravity and time. Then, high in the distance, faint lights flickered. At first, they appeared almost like stars, small, steady, unmoving. But stars don't maneuver. Stars don't shift positions subtly in formation. Stars don't approach at high speed. The unidentified points of light drew closer, their shapes sharpening gradually against the night sky. Sleek silhouettes began to emerge. Angular wings, elongated fuselages, twin tails cutting through moonlight. There was no mistaking the outline once it became clear. F-22 Raptors. Two of them. Silent, precise, deadly in their grace. They approached from slightly above the C-17, appearing almost ghost-like in the darkness. Their stealthy frames reflected almost no light, making them seem like shadows sliding effortlessly through the sky. Despite their speed and power, they held perfect formation, watching the struggling cargo aircraft with disciplined focus. Inside the cockpit, Zara noticed their presence instantly, but she did not react outwardly. She couldn't afford to. Her attention remained locked on the trembling controls, the inconsistent data, the unstable descent path. Yet deep inside, a shift occurred. Someone had found them. Someone had responded. Someone was watching. The F-22s maintained distance initially, observing, scanning, analyzing. Their sensors picked up the C-17's engine failures, electrical fluctuations, and uneven flight path. They detected the unusual thermal signatures, the erratic radar return, the chaotic airflow around failing components. Every detail fed into their onboard systems, painting a clearer picture of a cargo aircraft fighting for survival. Radar operators on the ground tracked the formation with increasing concern. Fighter teams identified the C-17's call sign, one that carried a history, not openly discussed but instantly recognized in certain circles. The presence of the Raptors wasn't coincidence. It was reaction, response, recognition. Still, the cockpit of the cargo plane received no clear message. Static ruled the radio. Silence ruled the sky. The Raptors shifted position, moving slightly downward and closer, drifting to the C-17's wing level. Their presence created a strange balance in the chaos, a sense that the sky was no longer empty. Their engines pulsed faintly, the soft glow contrasting with the dark horizon. One fighter took position on the left, the other on the right. Their movements were deliberate and calculated, mirroring the C-17's unpredictable sways without losing formation. They flew like guardians, silent escorts in darkness. The fighter pilots watched closely, noting every sign of worsening flight stability. Sensors fed them data, confirming severe multi-system failure on board the cargo aircraft. The Raptors adjusted their positions subtly, ready to guide, support, or intervene, though none of those options were simple at such altitude and in such conditions. Cloud layers thickened ahead. The C-17 moved toward them with unsettling momentum. Inside the cockpit, the soundscape changed. Less mechanical, more hollow, as if parts deep within the aircraft stopped responding altogether. The Raptors slid even closer. They needed to keep eyes on the aircraft. They needed to stay within visual contact. They needed to understand exactly what was happening inside this falling giant. Because it wasn't just an emergency, it felt like something more. The night stretched forward, heavy with tension, uncertainty, and silent coordination between a failing cargo aircraft and two watching stealth fighters. Yet even with their arrival, nothing improved inside the C-17. Hydraulic pressures weakened further. Electrical buses flickered dangerously. The aircraft's descent continued in uneven dips like a falling heart rate. The C-17, struggling to maintain altitude, continued drifting downward, its fate suspended on fragile wings. Failing systems, and the silent presence of two fighter jets that refused to leave its side. The truth behind the failures remained hidden. The danger remained unknown. The sky remained breathless. And the story was far from ending. The sky grew darker as the C-17 sank closer to the lower cloud layers. The two F-22s remained locked beside the failing aircraft, their formation unwavering despite the turbulence that began to ripple through the night. Each second became heavier than the last, and the cockpit lights dimmed further, as if the aircraft were taking its final breaths. Inside, Zara felt the weight of the situation growing. Her hands were stiff on the controls, arms trembling from the relentless effort of holding the wounded giant steady. Altitude continued to drop, faster than before. The remaining systems flickered with each passing mile, avionics screens barely providing enough data to make sense of flight conditions. Only her instincts kept the aircraft level. Then came the final blow. A brief explosion of sparks lit the left side of the cockpit as another electrical bus collapsed. Darkness consumed half the instrument panel, leaving only a sliver of functional gauges. The aircraft lurched, yawing sharply to one side. The sudden imbalance caused cargo in the rear hold to slide violently, shifting the center of gravity even further backward. The C-17 dipped aggressively. Altitude plummeted. The descent became dangerous, and yet through the chaos, help was moving fast. Below the clouds, the F-22 pilots coordinated silently through encrypted channels. Ground bases were alerted. Runways were cleared. Emergency teams scrambled into position. Fire trucks lined up. Ambulances waited on standby. A coordinated response unfolded across the region as radar identified the C-17's critical state. The escorts tightened their formation. One Raptor moved slightly ahead. The other remained close to the right wing. Their intention was simple: stay with the aircraft until its wheels touched the earth, or until the sky claimed it. Zara wrestled with the controls to stop the rapid descent. Every motion required immense strength, her muscles burning as she fought the dropping nose. The C-17 resisted like a machine near collapse, but it slowed marginally, enough to keep it from spiraling. Rayhan rerouted the last surviving electrical lines, forcing a few backup instruments to life. Barely readable, faintly flickering, but enough. Through the windshield, the faint glow of runway lights appeared far in the distance, shimmering like a lifeline stretched across the earth. They looked impossibly small, impossibly far, but they existed. And because they existed, hope existed. The injured giant limped toward them. The F-22s adjusted again, lowering their altitude to guide the cargo aircraft visually. One fighter dipped beneath the C-17's left wing, aligning to compensate for the asymmetric thrust by providing stabilizing airflow. The second fighter flew just above the right wing, maintaining a protective shield in case of sudden roll or loss of lift. The subtle aerodynamic support from the Raptors allowed Zara to regain partial control. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was enough. As the formation descended through the lowest layer of clouds, the runway lights grew brighter. Emergency teams watched the strange trio appear in the night sky, a heavy cargo aircraft limping with two stealth fighters flanking it like guardians. The final approach became the most delicate part of the entire ordeal. The C-17's landing gear extended unevenly. Its flaps moved sluggishly, powered by weakened hydraulics. The aircraft shook violently as wind pushed against its unbalanced frame. Yet Zara held her ground. The Raptors maintained formation until the last possible second. Only moments before touchdown did they peel away, banking to opposite sides in synchronized arcs. Leaving the C-17 alone for the final stretch, the runway rushed toward the aircraft. Zara lowered the nose gently. The main wheels hit first, harder than any training simulation, but held strong. The nose gear followed with an aggressive jolt. Sparks shot briefly from the undercarriage. Tires fought to maintain traction. The aircraft shuddered down the runway, brakes struggling under limited hydraulic pressure, but it stayed upright. It stayed on the runway. It stayed alive. The C-17 rolled to a heavy, trembling stop near the far end of the airfield. Smoke rising from overheated brakes, engines coughing their final dying vibrations. The night fell silent around it, silent in a way only survivors understand. Emergency crews rushed in. Fire trucks positioned themselves. Medics approached cautiously. Ground personnel surrounded the aircraft with lights and equipment. When the cockpit door opened, The team found Zara and Rehan exhausted, shaken, but conscious, living proof that sometimes skill alone isn't enough, and yet somehow it becomes everything. The investigation began within the hour. Engineers, technicians, and aviation safety officers combed the aircraft. They traced wiring failures, hydraulic collapses, sensor malfunctions, and fuel irregularities. What they discovered surprised even the most experienced investigators. A microscopic manufacturing defect inside a primary electrical harness, buried deep in the aircraft's internal frame, had caused a cascading short. The faulty harness triggered interference across the primary and secondary electrical buses, affecting both engine control units and communication systems. The defect was so rare that it had never appeared in previous models. It wasn't pilot error. It wasn't weather. It wasn't sabotage. It was a quiet flaw waiting to awaken. Zara's instincts had detected the earliest vibrations long before the first warning light. Her decision to remain calm, manage asymmetric control manually, and keep the aircraft aligned even while nearly blind saved not only the aircraft but possibly countless people on the ground had the giant fallen uncontrolled. Her name spread through aviation networks within hours. Her story reached military command within a day. And within a week, she was invited to a closed-door ceremony, one reserved for those whose actions rewrite what is possible in the sky. Inside a quiet hangar under the shadow of the aircraft she had saved, a small assembly gathered. The two F-22 pilots stood among them, their presence silent but powerful. Engineers, officers, and senior officials filled the room, each aware they were witnessing something rare. Zara stepped forward with a calmness she didn't fully feel. The moment carried weight, not because of medals or recognition, but because she understood what truly mattered. She had brought home a machine that shouldn't have survived and ensured that every soul in the sky that night made it safely back to Earth. A medal was placed in her hands, an honor given not for routine flying, but for courage, precision, and the ability to keep fighting when every system failed. Applause filled the hangar, echoing off metal walls. But the loudest honor wasn't sound. It was presence. The two F-22 pilots approached her after the ceremony. They didn't need words. Their simple nod, one professional, one grateful, said everything the sky had witnessed that night. The cargo pilot, who once preferred quiet, skies had become part of a story far bigger than she ever expected. And Hopetales had gained a hero born from darkness, failure, instinct, and the unbreakable will to bring everyone home. The sun rose slowly over the airbase, washing the runway with warm golden light. The C-17 sat quietly, its massive frame still bearing the scars of the night's ordeal. For most, it would have been just another cargo plane. But for Zara, it was a reminder of everything she had faced, and everything she had survived. The engines no longer roared, the alarms were silent, and yet the memory of turbulence, fire, and the unknown lingered in every corner of the cockpit. It was a place that had tested her skills, her instincts, and her courage to the absolute limit. The airbase was alive with quiet respect. Emergency crews, engineers, and military officers moved about, inspecting the aircraft, documenting every detail, and ensuring that nothing was left to chance. Despite the normalcy of routine procedures, an unspoken awe hung in the air. This was not just another cargo flight. This was a flight where human instinct had overcome a near-impossible mechanical failure, and where the fragile line between disaster and survival had been walked with precision, composure, and sheer willpower. Zara walked around the aircraft slowly, observing the dents, the burn marks, the worn tires, and the faint streaks of smoke. On the runway, where the brakes had struggled to bring the C-17 to a stop, each mark told a story. Each scar spoke of danger narrowly avoided. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the cold metal, imagining how different things could have been if even one moment had been handled incorrectly. Her heart still raced, not with fear, but with the realization of the enormity of what she had achieved. The F-22 pilots, who had escorted the C-17 through the dark skies, were nearby, debriefing with military command. Zara had learned their names in the following days, but their faces had already left an impression that she would never forget. Silent, professional, and unwavering, they had provided a presence that reassured her even when everything else was failing. They had flown like shadows, like guardians of the night, ensuring that the cargo plane could survive long enough to reach safety. Their silent nods, their measured movements, their meticulous coordination, it had all contributed to her survival. Inside the debrief room, investigators pieced together the timeline of failure, studying every electrical harness, every hydraulic line, every control input. They confirmed what Zara had known instinctively. The aircraft had suffered from an extraordinarily rare cascading electrical failure. It had begun with a tiny flaw, a microscopic defect, that propagated through multiple systems. Without her precise control and quick thinking, the aircraft would not have made it. Yet no report could fully capture the human element, the calm decision-making, the muscle memory, the gut instinct, honed over thousands of flight hours, that had ultimately saved the plane. The medal ceremony that followed was intimate, yet profoundly meaningful. Alina, the cargo pilot who had been invisible to the world just days ago, now stood as a symbol of courage, resilience, and hope. The military brass presented her with a medal, its polished surface reflecting the rising sun. She accepted it not with arrogance, but with quiet gratitude, aware that the honor represented something larger than herself. It represented every cargo pilot who flew unnoticed, every person who remained calm in the eye of the storm, and every human being who dared to face fear head-on. As cameras clicked and personnel saluted, Zara's eyes drifted to the horizon. The sky stretched endlessly above, serene and patient, as if it had watched every struggle and now offered a gentle acknowledgement of victory. Memories of the night returned, the violent shudders, the failing instruments, the eerie silence of the broken radios, and the precise guiding presence of the F-22s. Each memory carried both tension and triumph, terror and hope. She realized that while the aircraft had survived, the true story lay in the courage of those who had flown it. The aftermath of the flight rippled beyond the airbase. Aviation networks highlighted the story, sharing the incredible tale of instinct and heroism. Colleagues, family, and strangers alike were inspired by her calm under pressure. Emails and messages poured in, recounting gratitude, awe, and admiration. Many wrote about how the story made them rethink fear, courage, and responsibility. Some were pilots themselves, humbled by her composure. Others were people who had never set foot in a cockpit, yet felt the impact of her bravery deeply. Over time, the flight became a case study. Aviation schools analyzed it for lessons in manual flying under extreme failure conditions. Engineers used the incident to refine inspection protocols, ensuring that future aircraft were even safer. Military and civilian pilots alike discussed the flight in training sessions, dissecting each moment of decision-making and control. What began as a routine cargo mission had evolved into a lasting lesson for the aviation community, a story of human instinct, surpassing mechanical failure, and the delicate balance between technology and skill. For Zara, the personal impact was profound. She returned to flying, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Every takeoff reminded her of the fragility of life and the responsibility of command. Every landing reaffirmed her trust in her training and instincts. And every glance at the sky reminded her that heroes often exist quietly, without fanfare, until a moment arises when courage must define them. The C-17 itself was repaired, restored, and returned to service. Yet it bore the invisible mark of that extraordinary night. Engineers, pilots, and personnel who handled it knew it had survived something remarkable. It was no longer merely a machine. It was a testament, proof that skill, calm, and persistence could bend the rules of fate, just enough to pull survival from the edge of disaster. Years later, the story of the cargo pilot in the F-22 escort would be recounted in classrooms, shared in motivational talks, and featured in aviation magazines. Young pilots would learn that flying isn't only about instruments and procedures. It's also about instinct, composure, and the courage to act decisively when all else fails. Children would hear of a quiet pilot who saved a plane that shouldn't have survived, and they would dream of the skies, inspired by the hope that one person can truly make a difference. And for Zara, every flight thereafter carried a silent promise to honor that night, to respect the sky's immense power, and to always remember that heroes are born not from perfection, but from resolve in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. In the end, the cargo pilot who had flown unnoticed became unforgettable, a beacon of hope and courage for everyone who dared. to look up at the sky and believe in the possibility of survival, of heroism, and of hope itself.